Chapter 6. The Creative Power of Thought. One of the great axioms in the new order of ideas of which I have spoken is that our thought possesses creative power, and since the whole superstructure depends on this foundation, it is well to examine it carefully. Now the starting point is to see that thought, or purely mental action, is the only possible source from which the existing creation could ever have come into manifestation at all. And it is on this account that in the preceding addresses I have laid stress on the origin of the cosmos. It is therefore not necessary to go over this ground again, and we will start this morning's inquiry on the assumption that every manifestation is in essence the expression of a divine thought. This being so, our own mind is the expression of a divine thought. The divine thought has produced something which itself is capable of thinking, but the question is whether its thinking has the same creative quality as that of the parent mind. Now, by the very hypothesis of the case, the whole creative process consists in the continual pressing so forward of the universal spirit for expression through the individual in particular, and spirit in its different modes is therefore the life and substance of the universe. Hence it follows that if there is to be an expression of thinking power, it can only be by expressing the same thinking power which subsists latent in the originating spirit. If it were less than this, it would only be some sort of mechanism, and would not be thinking power. So that to be thinking power at all, it must be identical in kind with that of the originating spirit. It is for this reason that man is said to be created in the image and likeness of God. And if we realize that it is impossible for him to be otherwise, we shall find a firm foundation from which to draw many important deductions. But if our thought possesses this creative power, why are we hampered by adverse conditions? The answer is, because hitherto we have used our power invertedly. We have taken the starting point of our thought from external facts and consequently created a repetition of facts of a similar nature. And so long as we do this, we must need go on perpetuating the old circle of limitation. And owing to the sensitiveness of the subconscious mind to suggestion, we are subject to a very powerful negative influence from those who are unacquainted with affirmative principles, and thus race beliefs and the thought currents of our own immediate environment tend to consolidate our own inverted thinking. It is therefore not surprising that the creative power of our thought, thus used in the wrong direction, has produced the limitations of which we complain. The remedy then is by reversing our method of thinking, and instead of taking external facts as our starting point, taking the inherent nature of mental power as our starting point. We have already gained two great steps in this direction. First, by seeing that the whole manifested cosmos could have had its origin nowhere but in mental power. And secondly, by realizing that our own mental power must be the same in kind with that of the originating mind. Now we can go a step further and see how this power in ourselves can be perpetuated and intensified. By the nature of the creative process, your mind is itself a thought of the parent mind. So, as long as this thought of the universal mind subsists, you will subsist, for you are it. But so long as you think this thought, it continues to subsist, and necessarily remains present in the divine mind, thus fulfilling the logical conditions required for the perpetuation of the individual life. A poor analogy of the process may be found in a self-influencing dynamo, where a magnetism generates the current and the current intensifies the magnetism, with the result of producing a still stronger current until the limit of saturation is reached. Only in the substantiative infinitude of the universal mind and the potential infinitude of the individual mind there is no limit of saturation. Or we may compare the interaction of the two minds to two mirrors, a great one and a small one, opposite each other, with the word life engraved on the larger one. Then, by the law of reflection, the word life will also appear on the image of the smaller mirror reflected in the greater. Of course, these are only very imperfect analogies. But if you can once grasp the idea of your own individuality as a thought in the divine mind, which is able to perpetuate itself by thinking of itself as the thought which it is, you have got at the root of the whole matter. And by the same process you will not only perpetuate your life, but you will also expand it. When we realize this on the one hand, and on the other that all external conditions, including the body, are produced by thought, we find ourselves standing between two infinites, the infinite of mind and the infinite of substance, from both of which we can draw what we will, and mold specific conditions out of the universal substance by the creative power which we draw in from the universal mind. But we must recollect that this is not by the force of personal will upon the substance, which is an error that will land us all in all sorts of inversion, but by realizing our mind as a channel through which the universal mind operates upon substance in a particular way, according to the mode of thought which we are seeking to embody. If then our thought is habitually concentrated upon principles rather than on particular things, realizing that principles are nothing else than the divine mind in operation, we shall find that they will necessarily germinate to produce their own expression in corresponding facts, thus verifying the words of the great teacher, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and his righteousness, and all things shall be added on to you." But we must never lose sight of the reason for the creative power of our thought. That is because our mind is itself a thought of the divine mind, and that consequently our increase in livingness and creative power must be in exact proportion to our perception of our relation to the parent mind. In such considerations as these is to be found the philosophical basis of the Bible doctrine of sonship, with its culmination in the conception of the Christ. These are not mere fancies, but the expression of strictly scientific principles in their application to the deepest problems of the individual life. And their basis is that each one's world, whether in or out of the flesh, must necessarily be created by his own consciousness. And in its turn, his mode of consciousness will necessarily take its color from his conception of his relation to the divine mind. To the exclusion of light and color, if he realizes no divine mind, and to their building up in forms of beauty in proportion as he realizes his identity of being with the all-originating Spirit, which is light, love, and beauty in itself. Thus the great creative work of thought in each of us is to make us consciously sons and daughters of the Almighty, realizing that by our divine origin we can never really be separated from the parent mind, which is continually seeking expression through us, and that any apparent separation is due to our own misconception of the true nature of the inherent relation between the universal and the individual. This is the lesson which the great teacher has so luminously out before us in the parable of the prodigal son. End of chapter.